I believe that we can start now. All right, so we'll just kick off to say welcome to everybody who's joined us today, both in person and online, as well as to those who might be tuning on via YouTube. I want to give everybody an opportunity to just introduce themselves before we kick off. My name's Kayla Murray, and I'm the Standing Committee Chair for this committee, so you're very welcome. I'd like to offer the members in-house an opportunity to introduce themselves, as well as the members online, starting with Member Nkondlo.
Morning, Chairperson, and morning, everybody. My name is Nomi Nkondlo, and I'm a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. I recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, member of this committee.
Thank you, Member. I recognize Member Mackenzie.
Good morning, Chairperson. Ricardo Mackenzie.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members online who I might have missed? No? I'll hand over now to the department and to the service provider in-house to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name's Claire Horton. I'm from the Western Cape Provincial Treasury Fiscal Policy.
Chairperson and several members, Ms. Malcolm Wesson.
Morning, Chair and members. My name is Shirley Robinson, and I'm Chief Director of Public Policy Services in the Provincial Treasury. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson and committee members. My name is Nicole Hayward. I am from Nexus Forensic Services, where I'm a senior manager and I'm the service provider.
Thank you very much to all in the House. I would now like to hand over to any members of the department or service provider who are online.
Good morning all. My name is Jan Moluleka. I'm a manager at Nexus Forensic Services.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? I see nobody else. I'd also now like to just give an opportunity for the staff present here today to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Zayda Adams, Procedural Officer.
Ms. Suraj, would you like to introduce yourself? Nope. Are there any staff members online who would also like to introduce themselves? I see Lizette. Okay, we'll move on in that case. So thank you, everybody, and welcome again. It's great to have you all today for this. Member Mackenzie?
So I'm not sure if you saw my hand. Chairperson, I was wondering if I could make a suggestion that this meeting be held in camera, please, given the nature, the confidentiality of the information that we received. I think it's appropriate and out of respect for the candidates that this meeting be held in camera.
Yes, thank you very much. So we'll do that for the probity report, if that's in order.
That's fine. That's all right. Which one are we doing first?
Member, we'll be starting off with a presentation from the Treasury.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of our next item, we will now table apologies. I want to confirm if there were any apologies received. No apologies. So I'll now hand over to the Provincial Treasury.
Thank you, Chairperson and honourable members. The presentation will be done by Ms. Horton, which will outline the process in terms of the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Boyson's indicated, I'm just going to take the committee through the process, and then in terms of the various legislation and regulations that govern the process, and then in terms of also what's transpired for this particular process. Okay. The requirements in terms of the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Act and regulations is set out in terms of Section 3, which dictates that the board should consist of 7 members appointed on a part-time basis by the Executive Council in accordance with the prescribed procedure, which shall provide for a public participation process in the nomination of candidates for appointment, provided that the Standing Committee of the Provincial Legislature responsible for this act shall evaluate all candidates as to the suitability for appointment. The legislation goes further in terms of describing the eligibility for appointment, and also in terms of the act says that eligible persons who have appropriate knowledge or experience, provided that appointments to the board shall be made with gender sensitivity. In terms of Section 4, eligibility for appointment as a member or employee of a board is as follows. You should be a natural person, have attained the age of 25 in the case of a board member, be a citizen of the Republic and ordinarily reside in the province of the Western Cape, be a fit and proper person as contemplated in Section 28AI, be of good financial standing and not be disqualified in terms of Section 5 of the Act. Section 5 outlines the following in terms of disqualifications for appointment. Any person that has been convicted of an offence in terms of this Act or any similar law, convicted of theft, forgery, fraud, the uttering of a forged document, perjury, or any offence under the Corruption Act, be an unrehabilitated insolvent, removed from any office of trust on account of misconduct or dishonesty, any political office bearer, anyone, whether personally or through a spouse, family member, partner, or associate, has a direct or indirect financial interest in gambling business or establishment, or has interest in business or enterprise that may conflict or interfere with the performance of their duties as a member of the board. Procedure for appointment. Section 3 of the regulations details the process that needs to be followed in terms of the nomination of candidates. The designated accounting officer, which in this case would be the head of the Provincial Treasury, shall by notice publish in each of the official languages of the province in the Provincial Gazette and in such other printed media as he or she may consider appropriate, invite nominations for candidates for appointment as members of the board. A nomination containing the name, address, telephone number, and curriculum vitae of a nominee shall be submitted to the designated accounting officer within 14 days of the date of publication of the notice. The accounting officer shall place at the disposal of each nominee for completion an application form, which shall be returned to the accounting officer within 21 days. From the date at their disposal, application forms need to be accompanied by a signed declaration stating their willingness to disclose full details of personal and financial affairs, statements signed by the applicant that they comply with the provisions of Section 4 of the Act in order to be eligible for appointment. Failure to submit a completed application form renders the application invalid. After the expiry of the application period, the accounting officer shall in each of the official languages of the province publish in the Provincial Gazette and such other printed media a notice specifying the names, addresses of each nominee who has submitted a valid application, providing for a 14-day calling for comment period regarding the suitability of such nominees. Then in terms of requirements, in terms of Section 4 of the regulations regarding the procedure for appointment, the designated accounting officer shall evaluate each application referred to in Regulation 3.3 and compile a short list of no less than 15 names, or in respect of any vacancy occurring on the board of no less than 3 names, of the most suitable candidates for appointment, provided that the designated accounting officer may request any additional information or documentation as may be required regarding the applicant's personal and financial affairs as is deemed necessary. The short list, as well as a comprehensive list of all applications together with all available information and documentation regarding their personal and financial affairs and any public comment received shall be submitted for consideration to the Standing Committee responsible for this Act. The relevant Standing Committee shall, within 7 days of receiving the relevant documentation, submit a short list of not less than 15 names, or in respect of any vacancy of the board of not less than 3 names, together with a comprehensive list of all the applicants to the responsible member for submission for consideration by the Executive Council. The designated accounting officer shall, on receipt of the resolution of the Executive Council concerning the successful candidates, inform all applicants of the outcome of the process. The next slide is just dealing with this particular process, which is before the committee now. The call for nominations was placed in accordance with Regulation 3.1 in the following printed media: Vukani, the Provincial Gazette, Die Burger, and the Weekend Argus on the 7th, 8th, and 9th of July 2022. This follows a previous exercise that was done to recruit members to the board. Unfortunately, that process failed to deliver an adequate number of suitable candidates that could be presented to the Standing Committee. There's a typing error here. A total of 8 nominees, not 20, were received. So it's 8 nominees were received. In accordance with Regulation 3, application forms were sent to all the eligible nominees, and 7 application forms were returned. We then subsequently published the names and addresses of each of the nominees that were submitted for a commenting period of 14 days. These notices were published in the same media as what the original call for nominees was placed, and that was done on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of September, asking for comment. No comments were received from the public. Provincial Treasury then also undertook probity investigations, which has been done for us, and these were received on the 14th of October. I'm just going to briefly highlight the profile of the existing current board members. Currently, there are 5 board members, so there is at present 2 vacancies on the board. The chairperson, Mr. Bassadeh, his experience is in terms of a legal background, and he is currently busy with his 2nd term on the board. Ms. Fani, who's the vice chairperson, her experience is in terms of governance and administration, and she's also on her 2nd term as a board member. Mr. Nichols, whose term expires at the end of this year in December. His experience is in terms of finance and governance. Mr. Aronser also has experience in terms of finance and governance. And Ms. Venter has a legal and governance background. I've basically captured the next slide in terms of outlining the skill set of the current board members and their experience. This process aims to fill 1 vacancy, given the number of shortlisted applications that were received. Sorry. Okay, as I was indicating, this process, given the number of applications or suitable applications that were received, aims to fill one vacancy. And PTE has already commenced with processes to fill the remaining vacancies. I would just like the committee to note also that there is a upcoming vacancy which expires in December, but that's not the current vacancy that we are aiming at. We are aiming, unfortunately, to fill a vacancy that already currently exists. In terms of the legislation, the Act provides for no guidance in terms of shortlisting criteria. So the Provincial Treasury is guided by the following. In terms of the King report, recommends that relevant boards should consist of a diverse skill set of people with regards in terms of their academic qualifications, technical expertise, relevant industry knowledge, experience, nationality, age, race, and gender. And these are the kind of broad sweeps of which we consider in terms of the shortlisting of applications received. We have forwarded 5 applications or made recommendations for 5 applications to the Standing Committee, as the regulations require that for any vacancy on the board, the accounting officer must compile a shortlist of no less than 3 names of the most suitable candidates for appointment. The Standing Committee should note that there are 2 2 applications that were not shortlisted for consideration. The one being an applicant that indicated an address outside of the Western Cape. He indicated an address in Gauteng. We did send a follow-up confirmation in terms of where does this application or applicant ordinarily reside, and the confirmation was that he ordinarily resides in Gauteng, and whenever he visits the Western Cape, he would normally stay in a guest house or a hotel. Another application that was not shortlisted for the Standing Committee was an applicant who has lesser qualifications and skill set to the current board members who currently serve on this board. So I'm now going to take the committee through the applications that have been proposed for shortlisting. The first application is Miss Anita Aronser. She's got a legal background, BProc diploma in law. She currently is an admitted attorney, and she previously has worked with legal aid, specializing in human rights, civil matters, and assisting indigent clients, in particular minor children rights. She also is a conveyancer. She's a presiding officer at the Western Cape Liquor Authority as well. The second shortlisted candidate is Mr. Andre Du Plessis. He's also got a legal background and is a member of the Rental Housing Tribunal and was previously a member of the Western Cape Liquor Authority. And then the next candidate is Mr. Theodore Fisher. He is a lieutenant colonel in the police services, specializing in support services. And he's been identified in terms of perhaps a skill set that he could bring in terms of a social dimension, a social experience, and also maybe in terms of assisting the board with regards to illegal gambling matters. Mr. Rowan Nichols, he's currently a board member and has applied. He's got a financial background. He's a chartered accountant and has previously served on the board and is a current board member and has extensive governance experience as well. The last candidate shortlisted is Mr. Basil Fink. He's also got a finance and governance experience with an MBA. He's specialized a lot in terms of working with municipal background, but also as a member of audit and performance auditing committee at the Theewaterskloof municipality and the risk committee for the Western Cape Education Training Authority. The process ahead is in the event that the Standing Committee wishes to conduct interviews, and should the Standing Committee wish so, Provincial Treasury can provide a list of possible questions and answering guide to the committee. The Provincial Treasury to provide the Standing Committee Secretariat with contact details of shortlisted candidates, and the Standing Committee of Finance to evaluate the candidates and make a recommendation to the responsible member for consideration by the Executive Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the department for taking us through that comprehensive report. So we will now move on to the question and answers portion of the Standing Committee. Are there any questions from members in the House? I recognize Member Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. My questions, let me just go back to my pages. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Just wanted to understand in page 2 of your slide, where in section 3 you explain, I think from the Act, that the eligible persons should have appropriate knowledge or experience. And I just want to understand, do you have a sort of a set of what this would mean in the context of the board, which would be standard and can actually be the basis through which you measure what an appropriate knowledge and experience. But also with that, Chair, in page 3, where I think the last bullet, where part of what must be looked at as a point of disqualification is the issue of conflict of interest. How do you manage this in line with actually the initial component of experience? Because surely here you are looking at people who have been in the same or who may have some knowledge of the same industry. So how do you measure, or how do you try and balance, that potential conflict of interest in that regard? Then, Chair, in slide 9, again, there's an interesting mention in bullet 2 and 3, because in our legislation of the Gambling Act, I think gender sensitivity is one that is pulled out as one of the important elements. But there's a relationship, I think, in your shortlisting criteria that you are bringing from the King 4, which I believe is correct, because the Gambling Authority operates within that governance environment. And if you look at them, they are broader. They go beyond gender sensitivity, so which comes first when you're looking at your own criteria? Which one do you prioritize, given that yours is actually the gender according to our own act versus what King 4 would say? My last one, Chair, is that are we, as the committee, provided the benefit of the list of applicants, all of the list of applicants versus the ones that you would have shortlisted, so that we also have a benefit of those that, as you had already summarized in the presentation, those that you would have sort of excluded based on the criteria that you have explained. Thank you very much. That's it for now.
Thank you, Member. Are there any further questions from members in the House? I recognize you, members.
It's Member Makamba Poche. My apologies for being late. I just want to verify on page 9 under shortlisting criteria applied on the shortlisted candidates and the one that has been excluded, where you have cited the issue of an address which is outside the province. So I just need verification or confirmation if the ad or the requirements, were you guys looking for specifically someone specifically from the Western Cape?
Thank you, member. I now recognize any members online who might have questions. Okay, I see no hands, but I do see that member Mackenzie has asked some questions in the chat, so I'll just read them aloud. Member Mackenzie's first question is, can the department provide clarity on anyone working for another level of government? His second question is, why are we not advertising further on other mediums given the poor response rate? Are we able to headhunt? His third question is, if another vacancy comes up, does this mean that we have to redo the process? The next question is, can these candidates not be used for the next vacancy that comes up? And then, though that is the summary of his questions, I just want to go back to the online members. Members, are there any questions with regards to process? I see no further questions. I do have some questions myself that I would like some clarity on, if that's in order. So my first question relates to page number 2. Again, here where we talk about ordinarily resident in the province. I understand that there is a legal opinion on what this means previously. I want to understand if the same legal opinion was applied when determining the shortlisting. Or whether a new approach was used. Then my next question with regards to page 6, again, and this speaks to member Mackenzie's question on no comment being received. My question similarly is, are there not more appropriate platforms that might be more targeted towards those in the industry and who you'd like to address, for example, Business Day or Fin24, etc. Then with regards to the probity investigations, I would like a better understanding on why an external service provider was used. Does the department not have capacity in-house, or does this support more independent review? If you could just provide clarity there. On current board members, my apologies for the overload of questions. I wanted to just, and apologies, I am new to this standing committee, just understand what is the term of the board member? How long do they serve for? And is it possible for you to share who is stepping down, or is that confidential? Then I believe that is the end of my questions. Having said that, I do see Member van der Westhuizen's hand. Member van der Westhuizen, do you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, I noticed that the number of applicants are also serving or have served on other boards, particularly also here in the Western Cape and on the Liquor Board. And I would like to know whether that should be seen as perhaps a concentration, of too many responsibilities in one person, or whether the department would be of the opinion that this be seen as, an asset in somebody's application, in the sense that that person obviously has been able to gain experience in serving on a board with fairly similar responsibilities, etc. And then also I see in some cases we have been finished with the terms during which those people have served, but then in other cases we don't have the terms. I think, if I may propose, Chair, that we should always strike a balance between some continuity, but then also getting in new people with perhaps fresh ideas, so that there's a continuous process of renewal on these boards. And perhaps if we could just get some information regarding the number of terms that people have served, the periods that they've served, where it has not been indicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member. I'd now like to hand over to the department to speak to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair, if you can remind me if I perhaps skip over one, because as you correctly said, there is a lot of questions, but let me go through the questions. In terms of the board itself, and the member's correct in terms of the Act does make reference to gender sensitivity, but I think we take note in terms of a broader concept of representativity in terms of the King report. So it'd be representativity in terms of population group, in terms of gender, in terms of social background, in terms of experience, in terms of skill set, and also importantly in terms of getting a mix between younger people and people with more experience. So we are cognizant and we do try in terms of drawing out a diverse set of people for shortlisting. Unfortunately, we are restricted in terms of the number of applications we receive. So as you will note, we only received 7 applications in terms of persons who had submitted an application form. And that we were necessitated in terms of the Act. There was one candidate that we did not shortlist who had indicated an address outside of the Western Cape. And the Act in its current form is quite explicit in terms of saying whether a person is ordinarily resident. So we did follow up with the candidate in question. In terms of ascertaining to make sure he had indicated in the application form that he ordinarily resides in Gauteng. And we did want to confirm to make sure this is indeed, there is no, that could be a business address or a work address, and he does in fact ordinarily reside in the Western Cape. And he was quite, straightforward to say, if I come to the Western Cape, I stay in a hotel or a guest house. So it's a clear indication that they're not ordinarily resident in the province. We do have other criteria where it becomes less clear in terms of somebody's ordinary status. Then we'd follow up, where do you work, where are your possessions and things like this. But in this case, the person was quite upfront to say, I do ordinarily reside. And he said, well, when I go to KZN, I do have a property in KZN, but when I come to the Western Cape, I stay in a guest house, basically. So unfortunately, that is the restriction in terms of why that particular candidate was not shortlisted in terms of the provisions in the Act. Then, in terms of the questions on the conflict of interest, I think that's a critical one, because one does actually. There is an acknowledgement that there's a need for somebody with gambling experience or business experience in general. Could also be a vital asset to the board. But one is also cognizant of the mandate of the board. The mandate of the board is in terms of regulating the licensing of gambling opportunities and gambling operators in the province. But equally so, the mandate of the board is also to promote responsible gambling and to make sure, as far as possible, to regulate against illegal gambling and to make sure that there's not the overstimulation of gambling. So they've got a broad mandate in terms of the various interests that they need to serve. There is a question in terms of ascertaining if somebody, firstly, there's questions obviously about your work experience and your qualifications in the application form. What would raise a red flag, though, if somebody said they've got shareholdings in a gambling institution, and the Act is quite explicit in terms of that yourself or family members should not have a stake in any gambling form. So we are guided in terms of what the legislation would say, and hence we also do have the probity to confirm these kind of factors in terms of what's stated in the Act, whether there are any red flags. So our starting point is obviously what somebody would self-declare in the application form, and there are questions related to that. And members will see when we do send out the forms, you will see how people have responded to certain questions in their application. I would agree in terms of we are not getting an adequate number of nominees and applications. We have tried various approaches. We do have it put out on LinkedIn. So there is electronic media that puts out this notice. More appropriate platforms maybe is Fin24 and Business Day, and that's something we can consider going forward. But one also has to note that we are targeting a Western Cape audience, but I agree. I think that's something we do need to actually consider in terms of going forward to look at advertising on those platforms as well. Then in terms of I think then it's Member van der Westhuizen's questions in terms of the terms. Yes, Member van der Westhuizen is 100% correct. There does seem to be a very small pool of people who apply, and it does tend to be either people who've got board experience on other boards or people who've previously served on this board. So, for example, Ms. Venter has served also on the Liquor Authority. Mr. Arendse has also previously served on this Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. Mr. Nichols, similarly so, is a current member and previously quite some time ago was also a board member. And Ms. Fani is on her second term and Mr. Bassaday is on his second term. And I think there is a need to bring in some younger applicants or younger blood so that there's this cross-fertilization or the cross-pollination of skills of existing members, but also of new skill set that a younger person who hasn't got the board experience can bring. And it is something that we do actively, try to get. So if there is an applicant, we would definitely put forward such an application for shortlisting and consideration. But one is also cognizant of the skill set that is on the board. That you want to try and balance a large array of skill sets, and you've got to make sure that there is the necessary entrenched skill and knowledge of how boards work and of the gambling industry. So it is a challenge, and I fully agree with the contention of the committee in terms of trying to find that balance between existing experience as well as to getting new blood in. In terms of too many responsibilities, this is a part-time position. It's not a full-term board member. The boards do sit as a board. They sit once a month. And in terms of sitting on committees, a board member might be a member of 2 committees. So that should be a responsibility of approximately 3 days a month is what it would normally work out to be. Obviously, if there's a gap in terms of the number of vacancies on the board, then some people would unfortunately need to double up in terms of their duties. So that would be a bit more onerous on them. In terms of the question, external service provider, PT doesn't really have that skill set or capacity internally to conduct these probaties. And obviously, I think there is a need for also a distance between ourselves and the quality of, or the need to have a thoroughly investigated probity report done. So we have in the past, and we do make use of an external service provider who also would have automatic links to various systems to check qualifications, any issues that need to be in terms of criminal records, etc. And well, the unit with fiscal policy who's driving this process does not have links to those kind of systems, and neither do we have the skill set in terms of conducting probaties. I hope I have answered all the questions. Maybe I've missed
there's
it.
another question related to the term. The term of office is actually ordinarily 3 years, which can be extended for another year. So it could be 3 or 4 years, depending.
Thank you. Does that conclude the responses from the department? Yes, thank you. Are there further follow-ups? I recognize Member Mkambocha.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I've got a follow-up question on the issue of too many responsibilities. I hear your explanation. However, I want to know, what do you make of someone? For an example, I looked at the shortlisted candidates. There's a person here who is a director for more than 34
Sorry, member,
companies.
if I can just come in with regards to the information pertaining to the candidates, we've decided that we're going to discuss that specific information in
Okay.
camera, just because it is very sensitive.
Okay, no
Thank you.
problem. Okay, no, I'll just make reference to, okay, with someone who's managing more than like enough companies, how do you make of that person having to add value into into your board? Regardless of how many, like you sit 3 times a month, that's what you've said. So how do you create balance on somebody in that space?
Thank you. Was there a follow-up, Member Nkotli?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the responses. My one, I think I just wanted to check from Treasury. Is there room in your experience as administering this process and the implementation of this act for the alignment of the terms? I'm asking in relation to the fact that every other time, like I think Liz has already mentioned that there's already another vacancy already. And I know, I mean, we've said here, sometimes you just get confused that the last time we were sitting, you don't know what has happened. Now there's another one. Is there, I mean, in your conversations as people who are managing and administering the process, any view around alignment of terms? The second one, given the smaller pool in this sector, because this indeed is not your problem, it's an industry challenge, and I'm not sure the extent to which you are engaging with a department like the Economic Development, or because I'm sure that may not necessarily be your mandate as Provincial Treasury to get this to industry, because the smaller the industry and the smaller the pool, the challenge is always going to be to realize the diversity that we need. And it gets to the kind of, repetitive kind of candidates, which indeed is a phenomenon, not of yourselves, but of the industry. So I'm not sure at what point is that conversation to give feedback to the industry so that at least there is much more appreciation and some kind of transformation that must happen in that particular space. And in that regard, do you have the practice of headhunting? And if you do have it, have you at any point sort of applied it? And I'm thinking you speak about a younger pool or a younger sort of profile of candidates. And one is just thinking off my head. I remember in the last sort of similar process we had to undertake, we had very good candidates, some were young, and I'm not sure the extent to which you keep those so that when you have to go and advertise for a new one, whether you do go back to those people whom maybe because of whatever rating at the time may not have made it, but they still, would have been better candidates. And actually in terms of diversity, because I remember, I think 2 young women, I think one had some global finance governance, financial governance experience, whom I'm not sure whether she finally became one of the board members. So that's why I'm asking whether do you sort of utilize the headhunting where you would be able to justify based on trying to realize your gender sensitivity and all the other diversity elements. So I think that is just my concern, because when one looks at what you have shortlisted here, it's very interesting that already you are sitting at the predominantly males in this group and only one female, if indeed gender sensitivity is anything to go by. And I'm not sure at this point, maybe you guys can indicate how gender what is the gender profile of the current board, you know, so that at least we can have some sense given what we have, you know. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member. I recognize Member van Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, again, my question relates to the number of terms served, etc. And if I could just ask, on that slide on which you've set I think you call it the end date. Let me just quickly go to that slide. Appointment end date. Is that for the initial term, meaning that it can still be extended for a year, or are some of those candidates already within their additional or extended year? And if you say that some of them have, you know, already served the previous term, are there any of the existing board members or of the applicants who have already served more than one term on the liquor board? And then just a comment. Yes, we regret the small number of people that have eventually submitted their completed forms. But Chair, I must say, having received some of those document packs in the past, it is extremely onerous to complete those forms. No other job that I can think of require of you to reveal so much personal information. And I understand why in this process it is required. But I do think that this serves as a hindrance for many people, particularly busy, highly qualified, capable people, to fill out, you know, such detail in a form. And I think we might have to look at that process if we want to broaden the future list of applicants to consider. But if I could just get first, in terms of the appointment end date, are any of the existing members within the extension or extended year period? And secondly, are any of them serving for a first or second term? I think that would also help us to consider in terms of the new blood that was referred to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member. I do have some follow-up questions of my own before I hand over to the department. I wanted to get an understanding of what was the remuneration for board members, and also what are the sanctions for non-attendance. Then I also wanted to just go back to that question on ordinarily resident. I'm not sure if that was answered, but my question is, are we using the previous legal opinion, or was there another mechanism used to determine what it means to be ordinarily resident, such as domicile, etc.? And then my final question is, does the department have an estimation or a rough idea on when the next vacancy will need to be filled? I'll now hand over to the department.
Thank you. The first question in terms of too many responsibilities, I think it would be, you know, it's a dual process. I think the standing committee also has the responsibility in terms of ascertaining in their, on receipt of the probity and on receipt of the shortlisted candidates, the application form, and indeed through whatever process you intend to follow in terms of validating the suitability of candidates to determine whether somebody does or doesn't have the time. On the face of it, I would agree that 36 directorates does seem excessive, but I do feel that it would be answering the question on behalf of the candidate to determine whether they do or don't have sufficient time in terms of fulfilling their responsibilities. Is there room for the alignment of the terms? I would agree with the committee that is a very onerous process, and we actually have tried as far as possible to streamline the process. And we have sought various legal opinions in terms of, you know, can we use candidates that have applied on a previous round and submit their names to the next round, just to streamline the processes, because it's both time consuming for the standing committee, but it's also an expensive process to run. We have received legal advice that unfortunately, in terms of the way the legislation is crafted, that each process needs to be looked at individually, and we cannot make use of applicants from a previous round to use them in a vacancy that may emerge. Then in terms of the question, do we follow up with candidates who may have previously applied that look very promising candidates? And the answer is yes, we do. We repeatedly would actually approach a candidate to say, take note, we are going to be advertising shortly. We would go out of our way to even send the application form, or not the application, to call once again that the notice that's been advertised, we would forward that to them to say, please, could you include your name in terms of a nomination? So we would follow up with candidates. We also have the same interest as the committee in terms of having a suitable number of applicants that apply, because we would preferably like to fill as many vacancies in one process than have to go through numerous processes. So yes, we do actively would follow up with an applicant to say, please, could you send in a nomination? Okay. In terms of headhunting, well, we haven't followed a process other than if there's a suitable candidate that does apply, that we would suggest that they send in a new nomination once a new round is commenced. I think we do need to give greater attention and maybe put up these notices at universities, particularly where there's postgraduate students. I think we could definitely approach the universities to put up a notice indicating that there is a round for applications. In terms of the number of terms served, Member van der Westhuizen, Mr. Bassadei is on his second term. Ms. Farney is on her second term. Mr. Nichols, who's also applied, is currently a board member. His term expires in December. So he's applied as part of this process. He has also, I wouldn't know exactly when, it's before my time, but has previously also served on the board. So if successful, this in effect would represent, I think, his third term. Mr. Arendse is also on his second term, and Ms. Venter, it's the first term on the gambling board. All up to now, we have followed the standard practice of appointing members for a 3-year period. Although the legislation does provide for a 4-year candidacy, the legislation also provides that you can repeatedly apply to be a board member. There's no limitations in terms of the number of terms you may serve as a board member. So somebody could, in effect, in terms of the legislation, if the standing committee and the responsible executive found such a person to be suitable, you could serve 4 terms. There is nothing in the legislation that prohibits somebody reapplying. Okay, so in terms of the scope, Mr. Bassadei is in his first 3 years. Ms. Farney is also. Mr. Nichols, his term comes in December, but that would be a part of the 3-year term. Mr. Arendse also has a 3-year contract, and the same as Ms. Venter. So I hope that answers that set of questions. Okay, in terms of remuneration, if the standing committee could just give me a moment to find that out. I don't have it right on me. The sanctions for the non-attendance, obviously there is an arm's length relationship between the provincial treasury and the board itself. And that would be the responsibility of the chairperson to ensure that board members are in attendance. And if there would be an issue, it would be obviously, I would assume that the chairperson's first port of call would be obviously to engage with that board member to find out are there valid reasons and what the reasons may be. And I would imagine as a last resort, maybe at least alert the responsible executive, but it would not be the provincial treasury. That would be, in terms of good governance, we wouldn't be involved with that. I don't know, is there?
Legal standing.
Oh, yes. With this candidate, no, we didn't go through all the questions. We simply asked where he said, I ordinarily reside in Gauteng. We didn't ask you, didn't need to follow up with where's your possessions, where do you spend most of your time, where's your family residing. We normally would ask those questions only when somebody says, you know, but I actually do continue, although the form has indicated an address outside the Western Cape, would continue to like say, no, I'm ordinary resident. And then we would follow up with these questions like, where's your family? Where's your house? Where are your possessions? Those kind of things. Where do you what's your domicile? In this case, the person indicated straightforward. When I come to Western Cape, it would be on a temporary basis. So those are, I think, all the questions. If there's something, I can quickly, if you just give me a moment to find the remuneration.
Just in terms of the gender representativity, currently there's one female,
Two.
African female.
And a white female, Ms. Venter.
Sorry, two. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Two females out of the 5. One is an African, and the other one is a white.
Members, okay, Member Butcher will take your follow-up question. If there are any other urgent follow-up questions, kindly indicate so. I'd like to bring this part of the meeting to a close so that we can focus on the probity, as I imagine there's a lot more that we'd like to get into there. Over to you, Member.
Thank you very much. On the last question pertaining to the issue of an address, I want to understand, how does his response have an impact on the process of the application when you guys have indicated that the person who's going to be filling this position will only be here, like attend the meetings like 3 months, 3 times a month. So for a person who says to you, I can have an accommodation in Western Cape, then how does it have an impact on his work if he's only be here in like three times a month? So how is he penalized in terms of being excluded in the process?
Thank you, Member. Over to the department.
I would agree with the member, but it's in terms of the Act. The Act says you must ordinarily reside in the Western Cape or this province. It's not, it doesn't say that you know, in terms of being available for a meeting, or that no cost should be borne by the board to ensure that you are at a meeting. It simply says you must ordinarily reside in the Western Cape. And we have had legal opinion, and this very standing committee has made a determination in terms of you must ordinarily reside. I would agree in terms of, but that is how the legislation is worded at present.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
One.
Yes.
Question was also asked whether the same candidates can be used for the next process. Obviously, they have to reapply, but I just want to bring across the point that the operations of the board is currently at risk of not meeting a quorum if we don't make an appointment from this process, as there's only currently 5 board members out of the 7.
Thank you very much. Members, we resolved earlier that we would have the probity portion of the report in camera. So I will now close this portion of the meeting, if that's in order. And I would also like to I see 2 hands. I just want to confirm are these follow-up questions, and if so, I feel that the follow-up questions should rather be submitted in writing so that we have sufficient time to deal with other parts of the agenda. I recognize firstly Member Mackenzie.
No, it's not a follow-up question. I think on the first, on the question of the person staying out of the Western Cape, I didn't, like I said, my sound is terrible here. We did make a resolution on this topic 4 years ago already. So it's not something that has to be reopened.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that?
On the person not staying in the Western Cape, this committee has made a determination on this matter already on somebody not staying in the Western Cape.
Okay, Member Mackenzie.
Not running the meeting, Mr. Member.
Member Mackenzie, we
Can't make such a ruling.
we have noted that there is a legal opinion which we have raised already. So this matter has been resolved, but thank you for flagging. I recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Just as the officials quite rightly said, at present, the law prescribes that that person or board members must be residing. All I can say is that the Western Cape is not unique in having that requirement of its board members. It's surely something which we can reconsider, particularly now that many meetings can be dealt with online, etc. But we are in line with other provinces in terms of that requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member Makamba Bochia, I noted that you wanted to come in.
No, I'm sorted. I think the last member has actually responded to my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So members, colleagues, we will now bring this portion of the meeting to a close. The reason being is we would like to hold the probity report in camera so that we can protect information pertaining to the close members associated with the applicants, as well as their addresses and other sensitive information and financial information. I would like to offer everyone an opportunity for a 5 to 10 minute body break. Not sure if the department would like to stay for this portion. Yes, they would. So we'll come back and reconvene at just after 10 past 10. Thank you, everyone. Hi, members. Can I just check if you can hear me?
Thank you. Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So members, we're now going to move on to the way forward. The question here really, members, is whether we want to move forward in terms of an interview process or a paper-based evaluation process. So I'm now going to put this on the floor and see what the feedback is from members. I recognize Member Nkambabocha and then Member Nkontlo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I captured your question correctly, that you want us to deliberate on whether the process of interviews should continue or not.
Yes, so essentially there isn't a definition or a legal requirement that we have interviews,
Okay.
but the committee traditionally does opt to have interviews. However, I'd like to ask the members, would you prefer to have an interview process or would you prefer to just analyze on a paper basis?
I'm not sure, but from my side, I think there's a lot of issues with regards to the process that has been presented to us. For an example, there's a question of the requirements to be selected as a candidate for interviews, but we see a lot of things that has not been dealt with. For an example, the issue of tax compliance that has not been attached on this document. So the question is now, how are these people qualified to be selected for interviews if they are not known in terms of their tax compliance? And then there's another issue of a candidate who was not able to be verified in terms of employment because there was nothing on the database. So on cases of that nature, how do you then determine a person is suitable to take the position or to be interviewed for that matter? So from my side, I don't think it's wise for us to go for interviews with this information because there's a lot of questions around the applicants that have been selected for interviews. So I'll pause there, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you, Member. I do note that we're going to go through resolutions after this point, but ultimately I just want to get clarity or consensus on whether we'll look at interviews or just analyzing the paper as it comes through. Member Nkontlo?
Chair, I would suggest not to proceed to interviews, analyze the information, as I think at this point from the first engagement, there are some gaps in what we have in front of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Nkontlo. Member van der Westhuizen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also, I've got a few opinions about this. The first one is I would love us to finish this process this year, if possible. I found in the past that between the date of the first advert and the eventual appointment of a person, that many, many months, have gone by, which I think does not constitute good practice and carries some risks. The second thing is I would eventually like to, for us as a committee, to interview, perhaps not all the candidates, but before we recommend any name to the minister, that at least with that person, we have an engagement so that we are able to put some questions. And thirdly, I agree completely with my colleagues that there are a number of outstanding issues, items that we would like some clarity on before we can even proceed to discuss who we would be inviting to an interview and who not. Also, can I add just to the requirements of the SARS compliance and the employment record and experience of candidates? There are a number of these candidates that have already served on Western Cape boards, even including this gambling board before. And I think it's important for us to get some form of feedback regarding things, and hopefully a little bit more than just the attendance of meetings, but were they able to contribute to the debate? And I don't quite know how we can get that in an objective manner, but certainly I believe that we need to gather as much information regarding the potential to come and contribute to the workings of the Gambling and Racing Board as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member. Are there any further inputs from members with regards to interview process? I see none. Members, my understanding collectively is that we do require further information in order to have an interview, but eventually we would like to get to a point where we can have an interview. With that said, I would like to propose that we request a legal opinion on what good financial standing means and what is required thereof. And also that the consultant provides the necessary information on tax certificates and MIE by the 1st of November, so that by the 4th of November, we are able to deliberate on this accordingly. Are members happy with that proposal? Okay, fantastic. Then I just want to talk through the way forward with that in mind. We will then strive to have the interviews on Friday, the 11th of November from 8 until 3:30. And this will include consideration and adoption of the draft report and recommendations of the candidates to be submitted to the minister. The committee will also decide on whether the interviews should be closed or open to the public, and if this should be live streamed. Perhaps I can put that to the committee now to ask whether they feel interviews should be open to the public. Are there any proposals? I see Member van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Interviews is unfortunately one of those things where those that are invited or slotted in later obviously then has the opportunity to listen to the questions, the kind of questions and the answers given by other candidates, which would give an unfair advantage to those that, are invited during the later part of the day or the later part of the interview process. So therefore, I would propose that the interviews be in a closed session. That would allow us then obviously to be able to, ask similar questions to candidates and therefore try to get some form of standardization in terms of our adjudication of the merits of the various candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. I would support that. Are there any seconders? Any seconders for the interviews to be held in camera, not live streamed, for the reason being that other members don't get a kind of heads up of the questions? Thank you. So we'll proceed to have those interviews in camera. Then the next point of order is just to note that Provincial Treasury will provide electronic files on the candidates 7 days before the interviews take place. So that will be the 4th of November, further noting that we are expected to receive information on the 1st of November relating to outstanding information. I see Member Nkontlo's hand.
Chair, in the legal opinion to be sought, can we also include what's the implication of sourcing any additional or any information at this level from the candidates? Doesn't that prejudice the others who would have submitted the information by the due date? Because if a tax clearance was a requirement in the advert and then a person does not, ordinarily you get disqualified in a process. So if now we are asking those members, the consultant to go and ask for that information, including the issue of the debt review, if we can include that before we can call all of these people, because then we do not want a situation where others would say they were unfairly judged because they tried to get the information on time and we had, preference of others giving them extra time to still submit information. Thanks.
Yes, I support that. Thank you. Any other supporters?
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Member. I recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Thank you. Just a small amendment to what Honourable Nkontlo has just proposed. In the advert or in the forms that the candidates had to provide or submit. I've just looked at the previous advert and there's no reference to any self-compliance, but it might be required in terms of the onerous forms that people need to complete to be able to apply. So I hope the Honourable Nkondlo would be happy for me to be tightening this even further. Thank you.
I see her shaking her head. So we'll include that as well in the legal opinion. Then just to take us through the rest of the process, so Provincial Treasury will provide the committee with possible questions and answer guide by the 4th of November. The committee will decide which questions they will ask the candidates. We can do this either through the samples provided by Provincial Treasury, or we can just make a decision in the morning. My preference would be that we allocate questions to members so that it makes for a more fair panel. Also to note that 45 minutes will be set aside in the morning of the interviews on the 11th of November from 8 until 8:45 so that we can just prep ourselves and address any last minute concerns. In terms of the scoring process, the committee will need to decide whether we will use the same scoring process as the last interview in 2021, where the committee chose to use the score sheet to score candidates with additional notes. This was submitted along with the adopted report to the minister. Also, just to note, this was a specific request from Provincial Treasury, which assisted the Minister and Executive Council when they made their final decision. So I'd like to put that to the committee now. Would we like to use the same scoring process as was previously used? Okay. I see members in the House are happy, and I also recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If we can shorten slightly the interview process, I would really appreciate that. But let's use that as a template. And normally we meet a little bit before the interview start and just finalize the questions that we submit to the candidates. But I think we also need to give Ms. Adams an indication of whether we would be happy to schedule these interviews for, let's say, 40 minutes each with a 10-minute break in between. I think that would be great. The next thing to consider is obviously whether we would allow candidates to be interviewed online or whether we need them to be physically present. I would like to propose that we keep it open, that we can have online interviews as we've had in the past, particularly during the COVID time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to address your first question with regards to interview times, myself and the presiding officer have spoken on this, and I'd like to propose to the committee that we have sessions of 30 minutes, no longer. If it ends earlier, fantastic. And then 10 minutes in between, just so we can deliberate as a committee. Would that be in order? Okay, I see
Happy.
shaking heads.
Happy.
Great, thank you. And then just to your question on online versus in person, my preference would be in person, but I would like to put it to the committee to see if there's a preference for hybrid approach. Okay, nobody. For the interviews, would you prefer a hybrid approach? Okay. Okay. Member van der Westhuizen, did you hear Member Nkamba Botja?
No,
Okay.
unfortunately not. Can I give my view? If we're going to require candidates to appear in person, then I believe we should treat them all, in a similar way. Obviously, members might be allowed to be joining in a hybrid fashion, but I think for the candidates that they will either all have to be online or then in physical attendance. And if you feel as chair that you would like to prefer them to come to the parliamentary precinct, that's fine with me then.
Thank you. I support your proposal that each should be interviewed in the same way to ensure fairness. In that case, I would like to propose that we do the interviews in person. Members, I'll now move on to the next point with regards to the interview process. So in terms of the consideration and adoption of the draft report and the recommendations of the candidates, this will take place directly after the interviews on the 11th of November, once the committee has decided on the recommended candidates. We'll have 3 candidates as a minimum according to the regulations, and the committee will also allow the procedural officer 30 minutes to conclude drafting the report, which will then be presented to the committee for consideration. Are there any further questions with regards to the interview process, way forward, or related resolutions? Okay. I see none. Okay. We'll then move on to the next part of our agenda. So this is going to take us back a while to the deliberations and resolutions from the annual report, which we've not yet concluded. So as the chairperson, I would like to propose that the committee adopts any resolutions or recommendations that come out of this and open up to the floor to see what resolutions there were from the annual report. I recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My first proposal would be that we note the annual reports from the department as well as from the entities, actually. The second one is just that we congratulate those that have been able to achieve an unqualified audit with no findings. And my first proposal is that we ask of the department, of Wesgro, to inform us of the adjustments that they've made in order for them to be able to again return to an unqualified audit finding with no qualifications. And particularly, if I recall correctly, some of the problems experienced by the Auditor General had to do with the fact that they were unable to verify some of the performance targets set by Wesgro. And therefore, I would like to propose that we engage with Wesgro on the performance targets that they've set. I do know that we might be somewhat dwelling onto what Scopa also might want to do, but I think in terms of the performance side, not the financial side, it is quite appropriate for us as a committee to in terms of our oversight role, ask them to come in and also appear before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recognize Member Nkontlo.
I support Member van der Kas on the proposal he has made. I just want to add, Chair, that the HOD did mention that they are reviewing the current strategy, and at a time appropriate, we should be asking them to come and present to us that strategy. And as part of that, with clarity around the notion of the informal economy that has been a perpetual discussion with the department, and the HOD had said such would form part of the new strategy, including how such indirect tape reduction gets responded to. The second one, Chair, that one would appreciate some information and possibly in future a presentation is the work the department is doing with the municipalities. Because if one talks about SMME development, particularly the informal economy, that's where you find them. So I think if possible, it would be important to even consider a joint engagement with local government in this regard, because sometimes it's very easy for our department to be ahead of things, but if at a local government level, in as far as their LED units are concerned, there isn't much traction, then you are always going to have somewhat a limitation in that regard. My last one, I think, also is, I think, on Wesgro. I think the department had told us that the provincial treasury, perhaps it's something we can do joint with the provincial treasury, but there was an indication that there's work that is done by Treasury around shareholder oversight, some framework that they're working on. If we can be able to get a report, an update on what that is, but also how do we try and tighten, I think, around the shareholder oversight role of our department to entities like Westgroup, because I think it's important for us in terms of performance information that it's reliable and useful from the Auditor General, whilst it is not ours. But I think it becomes important from where we're sitting, because that's where we derive, the kind of economic strategy that the department has. So for me, I think it would be important to just get to understand how is Westgro improving. I think the chairperson and the new CEO were highly, I think, encouraging in as far as the work that they will be starting to do. And perhaps we may want at certain times to just get an update of how they are improving on those things that have placed our entity to sort of regress from where they are. So I think that's that. And lastly, Chair, I think a congratulator or thank you note to the chair, the previous chair of Atlantic SCZ that has left us, even though he's already, I think, in his other commitment. I think he did great work to steer the ship during the foundation phase of the Atlantic SEZ. I would think it's only courtesy from our side to just write and thank you him as a committee on the great work he has done in that regard.
Thank you, Member. Members, are there any further recommendations or resolutions from the annual report? Okay, I see none. I'm going to just list some that I've made. So to Member Nkontlo's point with regards to the department communicating on, for example, their township economy strategy, I would like to perhaps request that the department provides us with a briefing on their Jobs for Growth action plan, which they mentioned encompasses their township economy response and also the stimulation of SMMEs. Then noting that we did have some guests from the public in attendance, if we could just follow up with the department on their engagements with Mr. Mbiko regarding his Younger Tourism Association. Then I did note Mr. Bester would be submitting questions to the SIDZ. I'm not sure if that requires any kind of resolution. I would also like to resolve that the committee perhaps next year visits the SIDZ and ASEZ to have a look at the progress made and also to just get a better understanding, particularly with regards to the SIDZ on the implementation of the 21 billion rand pipeline and looking at the infrastructure or the work in progress, I think they called it. Those would be my resolutions. If there aren't any further resolutions, then I will conclude this part of the program. Okay, I see no further resolutions. Members, if there's no other business, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for the robust conversations. And I'd like to adjourn and wish you all a good day further. Thank you, everybody.